All right, so I'm probably a little bit behind on this, but I have so many questions about this. And no, that is not the planet Earth in the background. That is an entirely different Earth-like world, so don't even bother trying to guess where I am on that. So recently, more or less found my way towards a couple videos identifying attacks on a federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon. So I have done a little bit of looking into it, and honestly, I cannot conductively say when these particular texts were. Some of the media, and again, I don't really look at um, the media all too much because of just how much it pains me to actually look at it. Seriously, how much painful how painful it is to look at it is just conflicting stories and the like. I think I've already said that when patterns don't align, it's enough to cause me physical pain. Anyway, so as far as I'm aware regarding that particular situation with the federal courthouse, early July, a bunch of people decided to arrange a protest. May have broken onto the property itself and engaged federal agents. Now, the thing about federal property is that it has its own rules and jurisdictions. And granted, it only encompasses a small area of the property in question. It's not the entire city. But I can at least tell you that, at least in accordance with gun control laws, there are specific rules in and around federal property that must be observed, as opposed to open property that is effectively managed by the state, the city in question, and public property in a nutshell. Because each of the three different levels have their own managing of certain areas. In my own state, despite me being within the city limits, I have seen places that are effectively owned and operated on by the state, and those bits of land actually have different rules as opposed to public property or property maintained by the city. So, federal is no different. It's akin to the levels of law enforcement in this particular instance. A lot of the larger cities, they have their local police department who effectively enforces the laws within a city, within the city limits. Beyond that city limits is the surrounding area done by the county, and that usually falls under the purview of the sheriff's department. And then you have, the state law enforcement, so on and so forth, highway patrols, that sort of thing. And then you have federalized law enforcement. Most people would think the FBI in this particular instance, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mostly true. Department of Homeland Security operates, their own law enforcement's customs and borders. They've got their own law enforcement individuals there as well. So these are the individuals that were engaged by the rioters. Were individuals who answer to an authority on the federal level and not necessarily city or state level legislature. Portland itself is a mess in that particular instance, and you see it all the times in these bigger metropolises. In this particular instance, where you know the local leadership, the mayor or the governor, will effectively, tell law enforcement officers to stand down and do nothing. Not so when you start to get onto different areas under different jurisdictions. Case in point, areas that are effectively privately owned. Now, having worked in private security in this particular instance, what I can tell you is those areas are effectively governed by private security. Now, local law enforcement is, permitted to go where they need to as necessary to do their job. But for the most part, they generally will not respond to anything unless private security has effectively called them onto that land. And before that happens, it is under the jurisdiction of private security. But, private security will cooperate with local law enforcement when things go awry. It's one of those things. So, what you have here are federal troops who operate under a different authority than the local leadership. They don't answer to the local governance. They answer to their own department heads all the way in Washington. So this means that if you commit a crime on federal property, you could be charged by the federal government as opposed to the state or local government, and they can bring charges to bear against you. It's a little bit different in that particular regard. So you have a federal courthouse operated by the federal government to, enforce federal law and, effectively hear cases that necessarily get up to that particular level. I believe that in order for anything to go before the Supreme Court, it has to first go through lower level federal courts. And this courthouse is one of those places where cases that do go before the Supreme Court are originally held with. That sort of thing. So, you have federal troops engaged and attacked by these local protesters, and because they attacked them at this point, it's effectively rioters at this point, and that is still in and of itself a federal crime. Assaulting a federal officer, I believe, is still a crime on the federal level. Now, a lot of the protests in this particular instance have been lately circling around the whole issue of federal troops supposedly rounding up quote-unquote protesters, tossing them into unmarked vans, and having them placed under arrest. Here's the thing. While the people are making a big stink about it, and the fact that they're going screeching on about this being tyranny and everything, this is not so different had the response of the mayor or the governor been to round up the initial protesters and have them, charged with rioting and destruction of property. We would be seeing the exact same thing. The only difference is instead of unmarked vehicles, they would probably be marked paddy wagons, so to speak. So, as an outsider just looking at this situation and knowing what I know, first off, why the hell would you attack federal property? I want to make this clear. The right to peaceably assemble and protest your government is covered under the First Amendment. I have no problem with this. The George Floyd riots started off with peaceful protesters who simply gathered outside of, certain areas and made their voices heard. I do not have a problem with this. I do not necessarily agree with everything they want, but they do make a few good points, and that is something I agree with on this instance. Now I'll get more into that in a minute. But the second they turned violent, that's not peaceful assembly. As much as the media would try to tell you, that is not peaceable assembly. That is not covered. Destruction of property, assault, battery, murder, the sorts of things that happened during the riots, that is not a right. It's not even a privilege. That's criminal behavior. That should be prosecuted under the law. Again, it is your right to peaceably assemble. I agree with that. And make your voices heard. Yes, do that. I support this 100%. I doubt you'll find anybody who disagrees with this. The problem is, as soon as you turn violent, as soon as that first rock or brick is thrown, as soon as that first window is cracked, as soon as first blood is drawn, it is no longer a protest. You have lost the peaceful part of that protest. You are no longer protesting. You are rioting. So, yeah, I don't support rioting. No, because at that point, you have effectively condemned yourselves. You are now engaging in criminal B activity that I do not condone, and there are consequences for criminal activity. And I think that's a big problem of what we have necessarily seen as of late. The reason why these protesters got so, well, again, I'm calling them protesters, I really should be calling them rioters. The reason they got so ballsy was because the local leadership did not enforce the consequences for their actions. You want to protest, go for it. Make your voices heard. We have seen cases where it works, but it does take a long time, and you have to continue that protesting. You have to put in the work and the effort. The civil rights movement, women's suffrages, all of that, is a result of years of constant protesting and peaceable civil disobedience. That's how you enact changes that you want to see and get people behind you. As soon as you turn to violence, you're going to lose, you lose the argument in that particular instance. I'm sorry, but you got all these media figures calling it peaceful protests while in the background you've got stores on fire, you've got people in the streets. Again, where is the justice for Daniel Dorn in this particular instance? Now, I recently found a story which apparently compares to a later attack on the courthouse, and this one, royally pisses me off because now it's making me question people that I once, believed in this particular instance. A story was recently run by the Washington Post about an individual called Christopher David, who was apparently he graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and was a member of the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, and he decided to go down and ask the federal officers about the oath of service, sworn to protect and defend the Constitution. As an Army veteran, I swore the same oath. So it baffles me that this veteran would walk up to a federal officer in the discharge of his duties, which is restoring peace and order and securing a federal building, and asking him why is he violating his oath. This is where I don't agree with this in this particular instance. I see these people rioting in the streets, burning down businesses, burning down buildings, hurting people, killing people. And when I am reminded of my oath of service to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and its people from all threats, foreign and domestic, these rioters are a domestic threat. They're hurting people. They're burning down buildings. They are not peaceful individuals. They are a threat. They are a threat to the average American. That is what these protesters are. So to see a veteran walk up to a federal officer and challenge him on the basis of an oath of service that was sworn to protect and defend the common American individual in the discharge of his duties baffles me. Because he is protecting, the federal trooper is protecting people inside the courthouse that would otherwise face threat from these rioters. They've already proven that they have no regard for property, as they, effectively tore down the barricades, gatehouses, whatever they did in order to effectively break into this courthouse and attack the federal troops. Now, the federal troops understand this. This is what they signed up for. This is what when I signed up for the Army, that's what I signed up for. To effectively, protect individuals from this kind of madness. This is what I don't understand. And the fact is that I have run into this effectively makes the second Navy veteran that I've run into who sides with these maniacs and questioning those of us who actually wish to protect and defend the average American, to make it clear and understood that there are consequences for the actions of these criminal behaviors. Again, 2 for 2 in regards to the Navy. So I have to wonder just what the hell the Navy is teaching this. So honestly, the Washington Post even quoted Christopher David basically going on about how, these are, he says that Trump claims that these are fringe crazy individuals. He says, no, these are just average people going about their lives. These are not average people going about their lives. They are a domestic threat. So if I had a serious question for Christopher David and Navy individuals in question, what about your oath of service? Why are you siding with these maniacs who have proven time and again that they do not care about American values or American people in general? If given a chance, they will hurt you and they will hurt fellow Americans. We've seen this. People who are minding their own business, who want to engage these people in, discourse, in discussion, who want to, challenge their ideas and have their own ideas challenged. If given a chance, they will try to hurt these people. So I ask you, Christopher David, if you stand with these people and allow them to hurt other people, why? What about your oath? You swore to protect and defend American civilians and American citizens, along with your fellow service members. You're asking the wrong question to the wrong people. You need to be asking yourself that question. And to be honest, to anyone in the Navy, or even any veteran in particular, who is willing to question, federal troops in this instance about this, you need to get off the boat, grab a rifle, and see what your Marine counterparts have to put up with. Because this is what the Army and the Marines do. These are the situations that we face. We see the individual people. We know that they're not, the fringe crazies and whatever. They're average people in this particular instance. But what differentiates them from the average American citizen who wants their voice to be heard and want open discourse, no, those are the people we protect. And the people who go against that, that's who we fight. That is what the Army and the Marines have to contend with. And again, I direct this more at the Navy because the Navy is 2 for 2, and I have yet to actually see any Army or Marine veteran, or hell, even Air Force for that matter, ask this question of themselves. And the other veteran Navy veteran that I ran into, called me a disgrace to the Army and the service in general, and supposedly was ashamed of sharing the same armed services. I am ashamed to also call that person a fellow service member in question for effective. I talked about this in my last video. It was the person in question who tried to convince me that Black Lives Matter stands for, equal justice. Now, I'm fairly certain that if there's any higher-ranking Army personnel out there, even the Department of Army in the question, will probably try to disavow these particular words. In that case, I have to question the leadership at that particular time. I really do. Because that speaks to essentially a disconnect with what is effectively happening on the ground. And I understand, when you're that high up, you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to understand things on a larger scale. You have to see the forest as opposed to the trees. But at the same time, it would do a lot of people good to, every once in a while, step down and look at the individual trees. See what's going on low and on the ground. Because, this is where the cognitive dissonance essentially comes from in that particular instance. Is that when you're that far back, you're that high up, and you don't necessarily look at things from a close-up perspective, you tend to lose sight of what the boys on the ground have to go through in that instance. And that can, lead to a question of what exactly are you really fighting in this particular instance. For the boys on the ground, we know what we're there for and necessarily what we're doing in that particular instance. We are upholding the oath to protect and defend the law of the land and the people that it governs. When you question that, when you side with people who don't respect that, then I have to question what you're even doing wearing the uniform. Disagree with? Certainly. Disagreements over, law that happens all the time. It's what we do. It's how we know, when certain laws are no longer necessary and it's time to strike them from the books. It's how we also know what laws we should necessarily put into place. Common law. It's a beautiful thing. But again, that leads back around to the whole idea of discourse in that instance. Being able to effectively discuss these things. And it's a shame to see that the Navy, the Navy veterans at this particular time are siding with the people who don't want a discourse. That's what you're doing. These people don't want a discourse. They want full-on implementation of their ideals. They don't care for a compromise. All or nothing, by any means necessary. And when you get to the point where you're doing by any means necessary, that's when, they have to start leveraging threats, leveraging violence, because talking isn't working for them. And that's where the oath of service necessarily comes in. So this is a serious question that I do have for Christopher David. Navy veterans, hell, the Navy in general, from an Army veteran. Have you seriously forgotten your oath of service and what that necessarily entails? Why are you questioning the people who are trying to protect the law of the land and its people when you should be asking that question yourself and taking a good, long, hard look at these rioters and their aims? Honestly, I even just call them rioters because we don't even really have a specific group at this particular time. Because if it was specific groups that were responsible for this is effectively a domestic terrorist organization, a domestic terrorist attack. I think we talked about that in the other video that I made for this. So, there you have it there. Again, it's questions that I ask myself, and I would, seriously try to ask other people, but nobody has a good answer for any of it. I mean, hell, I'm even willing to admit when I don't have the answer for something, but that's when I'm able to want to sit there and essentially just puzzle things out. That's what I do. I try to puzzle things out, try to figure out the answer to these harder questions. I don't sit there and scream about things. Reasonable. But I suppose I will never really get the answers to these particular questions, and I am just screaming into the void at this point.